2, 1. Okay, so the happy topic of lowest common multiple. I actually, to be honest, like thinking of it as just the smallest common multiple. And it definitely relates back to lowest common denominators. So anybody who's doing fractions, this is kind of a good exercise to figure out how to get a common denominator, which is the smallest denominator, between two or more denominators, right? So what is this kind of first common multiple? All right, so what is a multiple at all? So let me just kind of go in a little bit, and then I'm going to come back to these examples here. So if you have a number, so let's say if you have like a number like 5, well, when you have that just one number, it's kind of easy to tell if another number is a multiple of 5 or not. Basically, you divide and then you just try to see if it goes into it evenly. So for example, the next, okay, so if you have 5, so the next number or the next multiple of 5 is 10, because of the fact that you could multiply 5 by 2 and you're going to get 10. And then again, so the next multiple of 5 is basically 15, because you can multiply 5 by 3 and you're going to get 15. And then it continues, right? So then it's 20, okay, and so on. So those are all multiples of 5. So now, okay, you can take another number, right? So if you have some other number that you may want to work with, let's say like a number like 3, you can do the same thing, right? And you can ask, okay, so what are all the multiples of 3? Well, all the multiples of 3, well, the next one is going to be 6. Again, it's going to be times 2. Then it's going to be 9. All right, okay, then it carries on. It's going to be 12. And then it carries on, it's 15, okay, and so on and so on. So these are all multiples of 3 and then multiples of 5. Now, commonly what happens is in applications, so for example, when you're finding denominators, when you have just one fraction, then it's not a big deal. If you have two fractions and you want to be able to add them or subtract them, all of a sudden you have to find a common denominator, which is nothing else but simply just common multiples between two numbers. So here, okay, so the number 5, okay, and the number 3, if I wanted to find what a common multiple between both of these numbers are, then I can kind of go through and list all the multiples and then check. So notice 5, the next one is 10, then it's 15, and then it's 20. But if I go into 3, it's 3, 9, 12, and 15. So the first multiple, okay, that both of them share between themselves is 15, right? Because 5 goes into 15 and then 3 goes into 15. Okay, so that 15 is actually your lowest, okay, or it is the smallest, the first multiple that both of these numbers go into. And that's what we are referring to as simply as the lowest common multiple, or the smallest common multiple. And if you're talking about denominators, then that would have been your smallest, okay, or your lowest common denominator. So it is basically the first one. Now, it's not the only one, right? I mean, if you continue this, so if you go 15, then it goes 20, 25, and 30. And then if you go the multiples of 3, where it goes 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21, 24, and so on. So the next multiple that both of these will share will actually be 30, right? So that's going to be the next one. So that's still a common multiple, but it's not the smallest one. So our idea is that we want to find what is the smallest one possible. Now, doing this, right, where you're just listing them off, that takes a little bit of time. I mean, when the numbers are small, maybe it's not a big deal. So sometimes it's okay. But as the numbers get a little bit bigger, okay, then it becomes a little problematic. So in order to find this lowest common multiple, there is actually a little bit of an algorithm which utilizes prime numbers. So you kind of have to remember prime numbers. So if you've forgotten things related to prime numbers, okay, maybe I'll put a link up above. Okay, you can go into that video if you like. So, and that prime numbers also goes into prime factorization. And then we can actually find these lowest common multiples or lowest common denominators between two numbers. So I'm going to just show you what happens, and I'll start with smaller numbers, and then I'll show you with a little bit bigger numbers. Okay, so we have here, so I've taken 5 and 3, okay, so notice that here, so this 5, okay, and this 3, we know that the lowest common multiple within, okay, between these two is 15. Now, sometimes what people think is that all they really have to do is just multiply the two numbers, right? Because 3 times 5 is going to give you 15. That's going to work. It's going to give you a common multiple, but not always the lowest common multiple, meaning not the smallest one possible, all right? And for instance, so I'm going to just show you on the second example why that is not true. Okay, so notice here, all right, if I multiply 6 times 8, I'm going to get 48. So that's what a common multiple would be. Indeed, 6, okay, goes into 48 8 times, and 8 goes into 48 6 times. So 48 is a multiple of 6 and 8. But it is not the lowest common multiple. Okay, so how do I find the lowest common multiple? Well, you use kind of prime numbers, as I mentioned. So what we like to do, or at least what I kind of like to do, is I would list them. And this isn't just my method. I mean, I picked it up from others. Okay, so, you know, you'll find it readily, okay, used by many, you know, students or teachers or profs or whoever. And basically what happens is, you know, you list all the numbers that you have that you want to find the lowest common multiple between them. So here, what I do is, okay, I will start with, okay, 6, and I'm going to try to see which prime numbers. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to prime factorize this 6. Okay, so I'm going to take the prime numbers. Now, okay, so these prime numbers, so the first one is 2, okay, that I'm going to use because 2 goes into 6. And what I ask myself is, okay, so how many times does 2 go into 6? Well, it goes 3 times. Then I check, does 2 go into 8? Right? And 2 goes into 8. How many times? It goes in 4 times. All right? So what I've done is I've basically reduced the 6 and the 8. I've reduced it now to 3 and a 4, and I have this prime number on the left-hand side. And I will keep doing that until I pretty much reduce both columns, okay? The 6 column and then the 8 column. So I start with one column and then I just continue until I finish all of them. So the next step that I would do is I would say, okay, well, 3, okay, so because 3 is remaining here. So what prime number goes into 3? Well, 3 is a prime number, so the only prime number that will go into it is 3. And 3 divided by 3 is 1. Now, as soon as you basically get in your column 1, you have now reduced that column. So 2 times 3, which is on the left-hand side, is basically 6, and it reduced that particular column. Now, you always want to check if the number that you picked, okay, is also going to reduce the other number. Now, 3 into 4, it doesn't go at all. So what happens then? Okay, what happens is that 3 is not a factor of 4 at all, right? So here, we would do just simply rewrite the number again. And then, since we finished this particular column, so we're done with that column entirely, then we just move over to the next one because we have a 4. And how does that 4, okay, reduce? Well, the only prime numbers that go into 4 really is just 2. Okay, we're done with the 6's, so we don't do anything there. But 2 into 4 goes 2 times. And then again, 2 goes into 2. Now it goes 1 time. And now you've finished both of your columns. So what you've created on the left-hand side, so this right here, you have all the prime numbers that have reduced the 6 and the 8, right, entirely. So that's kind of like a prime factorization. And now, if you want to know what the lowest common multiple is, all you really have to do, and that's because of prime numbers and prime factoring, is you just multiply all of these prime factors. So 2 times 3 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, times 2 is 24. And that is the smallest, okay, or the lowest common multiple of 6 and 8. And notice it is not 48. it is actually smaller than that. All right, so multiplying two numbers, or sometimes multiplying two denominators, it's going to give you something which is common, but it won't necessarily give you the smallest one. And our idea is we want to have the smallest one. So for example, with denominators, it helps us because then our denominators are smaller, and then we don't have to worry about reducing possibly in the future. Okay, so that's a method that we use. Now I want to use this method again for the next example and again for the next two. Okay, so if you've grasped it already, great. Okay, if you haven't, let's take a look at a few more examples. So here what we have is now we have three numbers and we want to find the lowest common multiple between all three. Not just between two, but three. So this method that I kind of presented to you on the right hand side works for as many numbers as you like. Now it's going to be probably unlikely, that especially maybe in school, that you're going to be working with more than three. Okay, if someone gives you 4 or 5 or 6, I mean, it's kind of mean to be honest. But I guess it can happen. But the process is exactly the same. So what I'm going to do is, okay, so between here, so I draw my table. Now you may ask, does it really matter like which number goes first, second, or third? The answer is it doesn't matter. Okay, so you can list them. Sometimes I list them from smallest to largest. Okay, it's kind of convenient, but the reality is it doesn't matter because I have to factor out all of them, right? So I have to reduce all of them to 1. So if I start with 3, so on the left-hand side, I know that 3 is a prime number that goes into 3, obviously, because it is 3. So notice right away I kind of finish here with the 3. And then don't forget that you also want to check, does 3 go into 6? And the answer is yes. So if it does, you reduce it. If it doesn't go in, you leave it alone. So 3 doesn't go into 8, so it would have been left alone. Okay, so that's that. Now, I'm done with that first column. There's nothing else to do with the 3's. I've reduced it to 1. So now I move over to the next column. So the next column, I have a 2. Okay, so that means I'm going to reduce it by 2. So this is going to be 1. And there you go. So that's another column finished. And then don't forget, again, you still check if the 2 goes into the 8 because you want to make sure that it still reduces or not. Well, 2 does reduce 8. It reduces it to 4. So I have 2 columns now out of the way. So the 3 and the 6 column are finished because I stopped at 1. And then my last column, I have a 4. So I'm basically going to be reducing this. Now, 2 goes into 4 2 times, and then obviously 2 goes into 2 once. So here, all right, so that's, you have now reduced the entire thing. Now, when you get good at it, you won't have to necessarily reduce all of them. Like once there's that last column, when we had a 4, you can kind of technically stop because you would see that 4 is just 2 times 2. But in any case, so here, once you do this, okay, and then all the columns have been reduced, okay, so prime factorized, you just simply multiply and then you find out what your lowest common multiple is. Or if it's denominators, it would have been your lowest common denominator. So here we have 3 times 2, which is 6. Okay, so 6 times 2 is 12. And then this is going to be 24 again. All right. So here it is 24. Now, if you didn't use this method, you can use other methods. I mean, you can certainly list all the multiples and then just check which one is the smallest one if you really wanted to. But if you have now 3 of these and you try multiplying all of them, if you said like 3 times 6 times 8, right? So if you have done that, so 3 times 6 is already 18. And then 18 times 8, right? So you're going to get into the, 120, okay, something there. So that's a huge multiple. And then if you're doing denominators and you wanted to have a denominator of 120, I mean, that would be kind of annoying to try to find. So it is useful to find the smallest multiple possible, right? Or smallest denominator possible. Okay, so let's do another example. So here is, okay, now I am introducing fractions. So for fractions, when you're adding and subtracting, you have to find common denominators. So clearly 12 and 42 are not common denominators. So it would be beneficial for us to try to find what the smallest one might be. So here, so I'm going to just change the color. So I'm going to have 12 and then 42. And then I'm going to do exactly the same thing. All right, so I have my table. Now this might be longer because of the fact that I have a 42 in there. All right, but let's just see what happens. So right away, both numbers are even. So I like to start with 2. Okay, so it's an easier way to see. So 2 goes into 12 6 times. 2 goes into 42. Okay, and this would be 21 times. So that's 2. Now 6 is still divisible by 2. So again, remember, I'm going to continue the column until I finish it. So here, this is going to be 2. So that's going to reduce this to 3. But 2 doesn't go into 21. All right, so that means that I have to leave it as it is. So that would be 21 because I didn't reduce it. And now, okay, so I have a 3 here, so I'm going to reduce this by 3. So this column is finished. So that's that. Now 3 into 21, so how many times? Well, it goes 7 times. All right. And then 7 is actually a prime number. So that would be my last one, and then that reduces this column. So there you go. So I basically now know what my lowest common denominator is. So now 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 3, okay? 4 times 3, sorry, is 12, okay? And then 12 times 7, so we have 12, whoops. So we have 12 times 7, so that is 84, all right? Okay, so here within this, okay, if you multiply this out, this is 84. And now notice, I mean, again, so the point being is that when students are, because you know, some students are so used to multiplying the denominators to find a common denominator. I mean, if you did that, so let's say if you did 12 times 42, so notice that's 504. I mean, that's a huge denominator, right? It's clearly not the lowest one. Okay, so the lowest one, it turned out, okay, in this case to be 84, which is definitely much, much smaller, right? And then, so all we did was we just simply took all of these and then we multiplied them, right? So you can do it in your head, okay? So you can go ahead, or, I mean, if you're allowed to use calculators, I guess you can do that. Hopefully they're not letting you use calculators at this stage, okay? But it's much smaller denominator, and it is guaranteed to give you the lowest one. And that's how you find lowest common multiples, and that's how you find the lowest common denominators. All right, so here's a last one. Okay, so for anybody who still wants to see one more example, this is between 3 fractions. So here I'm going to have denominator of 4, 14, and 10. All right, so now I want to find the lowest common denominator, or the lowest common multiple between these numbers. So 4, 14, and 10. So if I write this out, so 4, and here I said, you know, it doesn't really matter how you write them. You know, you could write it like this. The order is irrelevant. So here you have it, and now you can go ahead and then again use your prime numbers. So if you start with here, just pick one, right? I typically will start the one on the left-hand side, and then I'll just keep reducing it. So this is going to be 4 divided by 2 is 2. 2 actually goes into 14 7 times, and 2 goes into 10 5 times. So that's what you have there. And now again, so I'm going to use 2 again because it will reduce my 2 right there. So that's finished with that column. 2 does not go into 7. It does not go into 5. So we leave it alone. And then, so now my next column, so this one, I'll finish this one. This is going to be 7, so that's going to give me 1. 7 doesn't go into 5, obviously. So we have that. And then finally, okay, so now that this column is finished, I can use my last column, okay, divide this, and now you have finished all your columns. And again, so all you do is you just multiply your left-hand side, basically your prime factorization, and you will get your lowest common denominator. All right, so 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 7 is 28, so and that would be 28 times 5. Okay, so you can do that. So 5 times 8 is 40. All right, 5 times 2, so this is going to be 140. Okay, so that's what you have there. And that's your lowest common denominator that you would have. Okay, and that's the process. All right, so if you liked it, okay, so give it a thumbs up. I hope that you find this process useful, and you hopefully this video has helped you in some way. All right, so we'll see you in future videos. Okay, so take care, everybody. Bye.